A very wealthy man falls in love with a very beautiful woman and marries her immediately. He unaware that she will cause him problems and eventually turn him into a homeless person. Finally, the woman is sentenced to death. Will the sentence be carried out? Welcome back to your channel. The title of the movie is Original Sin. Hope you enjoy it. Luis Antonio Vargas is a man driven by logic and practicality. He believes he isn't capable of love, viewing marriage as more of a partnership than a romantic connection. As the owner of a successful coffee business, Luis finds little time to search for a wife, so he begins corresponding with an American woman named Julia Russell, who agrees to marry him. However, when Julia arrives, she looks nothing like the photo she had sent. She explains that she didn't want him to choose her for superficial reasons. She wanted him to appreciate her personality instead. Luis, not entirely honest himself, had hidden his business success from her. Nonetheless, they proceed to his estate, where they get married in a church. After the ceremony, they sleep in separate rooms, with Julia explaining she isn't ready for intimacy with someone she has just met. She appreciates Luis's patience, allowing her time to adjust. The next morning, she surprises him by bringing breakfast to his bed. Luis quickly realizes she enjoys coffee, despite previously claiming in their letters to prefer tea. Julia explains that her sister had read her letters and didn't want Luis to know she liked coffee. They soon settle into a quiet married life, getting to know each other better. Eventually, Julia feels comfortable enough to let Luis into her bed, and from that point forward, their daily routine becomes more lively. Luis is thrilled with their relationship and shares his joy with his business partner. However, his partner grows concerned about Julia, as she hasn't appeared in public for quite some time. Luis, wanting to dispel these concerns, invites his partner to an upcoming theater performance. At the theater, something strange happens. During the performance, Julia becomes visibly disturbed by the appearance of one of the actors. During the intermission, she apologizes and excuses herself. Luis follows her backstage and finds her talking to the actor. Julia refuses to explain the situation, instead trying to distract Luis with affection. Later, Luis receives a letter from Julia's sister Emily, asking for an update on how Julia is settling into her new life. Concerned, Emily had even contacted the embassy to find out what happened to her sister. Luis convinces Julia to write back, which she reluctantly does. One night, after a nightmare, Luis comforts Julia, discovering scars on her back. She had planned to send the letter to Emily, but Luis volunteers to mail it for her. Luis takes Julia to the bank, offering her money for her personal needs. She plans to have new dresses made. One day, Luis encounters Walter, a private detective engaged to Emily. Walter explains that Emily sent him to check on Julia's well-being. Luis reassures him that Julia is fine, but Walter insists on seeing her himself. Luis agrees to invite him to visit. Back home, Luis forgets about Walter, distracted by Julia's affection after receiving her new fabrics. Despite their closeness, Luis grows curious about what Julia keeps locked in her chest. She refuses to show him, claiming she lost the key. Luis smells cigars, and Julia admits to trying smoking. Sometime later, Luis mentions Walter's upcoming visit, which visibly unsettles Julia. She becomes increasingly anxious, even snapping at her pet bird. Shortly after, the maid finds the bird dead, heightening Luis's suspicions. Emily, now suspicious as well, visits Luis at his workplace. She explains that she received a letter supposedly from Julia, but she believes it wasn't written by her sister. Emily shows the letter to Luis, and he begins to realize that the woman he married might not be who she claims to be. Rushing home, Luis discovers that Julia has fled, taking all of her belongings with her. He opens her chest, finding photos and clothing that belong to the real Julia Russell. Desperate, Luis goes to the bank, where he learns that his wife has withdrawn nearly all of his money. Heartbroken and betrayed, Luis falls into despair. He begins drinking heavily and frequenting questionable establishments, mourning the love he thought he had. In one such place, Walter finds him. Walter tells Luis that he's still looking for Emily and offers to help Luis find Julia. Together, they track her down to a hotel. Luis discovers that Julia, who is really named Bonnie, is staying with a Colonel Voorhees. He confronts her while she writes a letter to Billy, her accomplice. It turns out that Bonnie and Billy had met the real Julia on the ship, and when they learned of her plans, they conspired to rob Luis of his wealth. Julia had supposedly had an accident, which allowed Bonnie to assume her identity and carry out the scheme to take Luis's fortune. Bonnie handed the money over to Billy and disappeared. She confessed that she had started falling in love with Luis, which is why she fled. Moreover, Luis had forced her to write the letter to Emily, meaning their deception would eventually be uncovered. Luis, too, had fallen for Bonnie, which is why he couldn't bring himself to kill her. They spent the night together, and by morning, Bonnie revealed her story. She and Billy grew up in an orphanage, became actors, and eventually turned to a life of theft, targeting wealthy, lonely men. The colonel was intended to be Bonnie's next victim, but when he visited in the morning, Luis sent him away. Luis attempted to rid himself of Walter, who was still investigating Julia's disappearance. However, it wasn't easy. Walter tracked them down, confronted Luis, and revealed that he, too, had fallen for Bonnie. A struggle ensued, and during the scuffle, Luis accidentally fired his gun, causing Walter to collapse. Several more shots followed, and Walter remained on the ground, unmoving. Thinking Walter was dead, Bonnie sent Luis to the train station to buy tickets, intending to dispose of the body. But Walter suddenly regained consciousness. It was actually Billy. Knowing Luis's gun was loaded with blanks, Billy had faked his death. Billy wanted Bonnie to return to their old ways and finish robbing Luis. He still had a share in his coffee business that could be sold for a large sum. Billy convinced Bonnie to help him, with the plan that once they had the money, she would kill Luis. Billy assured Bonnie that Luis would never be able to fit into her world and that she would only become a burden to him. When Luis returned, he and Bonnie left together, unaware that Billy was following them. One night, Bonnie, plagued by nightmares, decided to earn money in a different way. She taught Luis secret signs to use during a card game, hoping to cheat their way to some cash, but their plan quickly fell apart when the experienced players caught on. Luis was beaten and thrown out into the street, while Bonnie was forced to use her body to settle the debt. After this ordeal, Luis realized his only option was to sell his share of the company, hoping that would provide them with enough to live on. Fearing that the police were after him for Walter's supposed murder, Luis kept his remaining money hidden. Meanwhile, Bonnie met with Billy, who marked her with another scar on her back, signifying the success of yet another scheme. Luis eventually returned with the money, but Bonnie's final task loomed over her. She had to kill him and take everything. She pretended there were rats in the house and went out late at night to buy poison. Suspicious, Luis followed her and overheard Bonnie discussing his murder with Billy. When Bonnie returned, Luis was waiting in the dark. She offered him coffee, but Luis quickly realized it was poison. He asked her for an honest conversation, and Bonnie confessed the entire plan. Despite the betrayal, Luis told her he truly loved her. Trusting his words, Luis drank the poisoned coffee. But at the last moment, Bonnie changed her mind and decided to save him. She helped Luis escape, hiding him from Billy. However, Billy tracked them down, threatening to kill Bonnie. This time, Luis fired his gun, which was now loaded with live bullets. Witnesses appeared at the scene just as Bonnie took the gun from Luis and finished off Billy herself. As Luis lay poisoned, she pleaded for someone to fetch a doctor to save him. Bonnie was arrested, and before her execution, she told her story to a priest who had come to hear her confession. The young priest became enamored with Bonnie, falling in love with her in his own way. In a desperate move, he committed a crime for her, giving her his clothes so she could escape the prison unnoticed. After her escape, Bonnie found Luis, and together they began making a living by cheating at cards. Bonnie used her knowledge of the game to help Luis win, telling him what cards the other players held. End the movie. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our other recaps and subscribe for more content, and leave comment below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.